The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." The next morning, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here." But when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside and asked, "What is it you want to tell me?" He said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him. They have taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting for your consent to their request." The commander dismissed the young man and cautioned him, "Don't tell anyone that you have reported this to me." Then he called 2 of his centurions and ordered them, "Get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen, to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide mounts for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix." He wrote a letter as follows: "Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him. But I came with my troops and rescued him, for I had learned that he is a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they are accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him." So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antipatris. The next day they let the cavalry go with him while they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived at Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear your case when your accusers get here." Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. So, hopefully we'll have a PowerPoint to help us follow this this morning. So hopefully that will come up in a few moments. But in the meantime, many of you may be old enough to remember the A-Team. Every Saturday at tea time, there was an episode on TV where the A-Team would get themselves involved helping someone in trouble. And according to the spiel at the beginning, they were made up of these 4 guys who were former elite soldiers who'd been accused of a crime they didn't commit, and they burst out of some penitentiary or whatever. And you had Hannibal, the guy in the middle. You had Face, the guy on the left. Then there's Murdoch in the middle. And I'm sure you all know who the other chap is. B.A. Baracus, yes, played by Mr. T. And if you get time this afternoon, it's worth going onto YouTube and seeing what he says about Sunday school. Anyway. But they formed a vigilante group, And when called upon, they would help folk who were in trouble. Usually it was the little guy against some big bully, some corrupt businessman or whatever it was, trying to cheat them off their land or whatever. And they would get involved, and every week there would be some big adventure where there was lots of drama, lots of high-speed chases, lots of car crashes and explosions, lots of shooting and all the rest of it, and never any blood. And no one ever get killed. And every week as well, at some point in the episode, they would be in a particular situation that was just impossible to get out of. However, they would get together with their different abilities. They'd put their resources together, usually a pipe, a spare tyre, and a cardboard box. Next minute they'd break out with a tank, and they'd get out of the impossible situation. And finally, when they'd saved the day, when they defeated the bad guy and the sun was shining again and they're all out, they're all laughing and joking, sort of natural order has been restored, you'd have this chap, Hannibal, with his black leather gloves, inevitably puffing on his cigar, saying, "I love it when a plan comes together." That was his catchphrase. I think he said it in every episode. "I love it when a plan comes together." They don't make programmes like that anymore, do they? Now, of course, it's just a load of nonsense. The whole programme is just a load of nonsense. And in real life, things are really quite different. The A-Team really show up. There's not always happy endings or satisfactory outcomes, and often it's the bad guys who appear to win. We live in a world that seems to be more marked with chaos and disorder and uncertainty, and those neatly packaged storylines of Hollywood really are our experience. And yet it is the consistent testimony of the Bible that the world, the various events and circumstances are not as random as they seem. That, if you like, behind the veil of this world is the unseen hand of God working in a remarkable way, governing all things, guiding all things according to his plan. It says in the Psalms, in Psalm 115, "Our God is in heaven, he does whatever pleases him." Now, this is something that we see in this passage. It's worth just a quick recap for the benefit of those that don't know the story. But Paul had been visiting Jerusalem. Now, prior to this, he'd been spreading the message of Jesus throughout what today is known as Turkey and Greece. And he taught that through faith in Jesus Christ, both Jew and non-Jew can be saved from judgment, can have their sins forgiven, and be restored to fellowship with God. And that salvation came through faith in Christ and not through some rigorous observance of the Jewish law or Jewish religious rituals. Now, back in Jerusalem, folks had got wind of this, and what he was teaching was getting misrepresented. So he was accused of teaching against the Jewish people. He was accused of teaching against the Jewish law. He was accused of teaching against the temple. And so when he was one day at the temple and he was spotted, a mob formed, and this mob was full of murderous intent. They were going to kill him. Now, the Romans that were stationed nearby, they heard the commotion, and they came to find out what was going on, and they were unable to really work out what was happening. So they arrested Paul. They took him back to the Roman barracks to interrogate him, and to do so by torture. However, when Paul revealed that he was a Roman citizen, that stopped. They knew they couldn't do that. They couldn't treat him in this way. And so instead, the commander ordered the Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin, to meet. He would bring Paul, and then they could question him, and they could find out exactly what was going on. However, when they tried that, it descended into a farce, as the Sanhedrin descended into some chaotic argument, where those who believed in the resurrection of the dead sided with Paul, those who didn't side with Paul, and so there was a big commotion, and so the commander took Paul back to the barracks, none of the wiser really as to what was going on and why these people hated Paul so much. Now, for Paul, it must have been quite a trying experience, because he was all about sharing the good news. He was all about telling people about Jesus. But here he was, imprisoned in Jerusalem. Now, he had been warned this would happen. But all the same, it must have been quite trying. And yet we're told, just as where we left it the last time, the following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." God told him to take courage, not to be overcome with fear or anxiety, because he had a plan. Paul was going to Rome. He was going to the seat of the greatest power in the known world at that time, and he was going to testify to the gospel of Jesus Christ. God had a plan. Do you know God's got a plan for all of us? He has a plan for this world. He has a plan for the church. In Ephesians, which is a fantastic New Testament letter, in some parts it's quite meaty, and this is a particular meaty part where something of that plan is shared with us. And he made known to us the mystery of his will, according to his good pleasure, which he purposed in Christ to be put into effect when the times have reached their fulfillment, to bring all things in heaven and on earth together under one head, even Christ. See, all history is progressing to the point where Jesus Christ comes back, where he is revealed to be Lord to all, where he is recognised by all as being Lord, where all of creation submit to his authority, where everything is made right, and he is given the glory that is due to him. And somewhere within that grand plan, there is a plan for us as individuals, for us as a church. Now, we don't know the ins and outs of that plan. If we did, we would know the future. We don't know the future. Well, we know that, but we don't know all the ins and outs, all the details of the future. But we do know that it's the Lord's stated intention to bless us. He tells us that through the prophet Jeremiah. He says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." Now, we have to state a caveat with that God isn't saying here that he prospers people regardless, because those words were spoken in the wider context of judgment coming upon the people because of their sin. But if we're repentant, if we turn to the Lord and place our trust in him, we can be assured he will bless us. For those of us who turn to Christ, we can be absolutely assured that the Lord has a plan for us, that he has a great plan for us. And that's a truth that's affirmed also in 1 Corinthians, where we read, "No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him." But God has revealed it to us by his Spirit. That through the testimony of the Bible, we know something of it. We know that through Jesus Christ, that he's dealt with our sin, that he's restored us to himself, that he's given us his Spirit, that he is changing us, he's making us more like Jesus. We also know that we have a wonderful future ahead of us with him in glory. But in the meantime, in this side of eternity, well, we work out our salvation and we serve him. But between now and then, we don't know what will happen. He does. And he calls us to follow him. He calls us to walk in fellowship with him. And as we do so, his plan for us unfolds. And he will reveal to us only what we need to know when we need to know it. But he has a plan for each one of us. And ultimately, it is a plan to bless us. It's a plan to prosper us spiritually. It's a plan to use us to testify to others and to build his kingdom. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that really exciting, to think that God has a purpose for us. It's an amazing thing to know that there is a reason for our existence. We're not accidents. We're here according to God's plan for his purposes. And there's a reason as well that we've been brought together. Again, that's exciting to discover that there's a reason that we exist as a church, and just figuring out what the Lord has in store for us as a church. Again, he has a plan and he has a purpose for us collectively. So it's our place to cooperate with him, to place our trust in him, to seek his face, to listen to his direction, and take courage and go with it. And not only does God have plans, but as we see here, his plans are not frustrated. God's plans are worked out. His plans will be fulfilled, even through hardships. It's encouraging to note here that despite the hardships that Paul was going through, the Lord was at work. It would have been easy for Paul, I'm sure, to become discouraged. He'd been arrested. He was now in these barracks. He was now hearing that there was a plot that was being organised against him to kill him. Yet the thing is, it was through this means that Paul went from being tried by the Jews to being tried by the Romans. That was the first step in him being taken to Rome. Now, of course, none of us like hardship. We don't welcome hardship. But see, having a big view of God, a view of God's love, a view of his power, a view of his wisdom, and being the governor and regulator of all things, that helps us to see hardships differently. That whatever difficult set of circumstances suddenly come upon us, we have to understand they haven't just suddenly come upon God. That nothing surprises God. And we might be intimidated into thinking that the problems that we are facing are too big to overcome. But the reality is they're not too big for God. In fact, those problems are the very means God is using to bring about his purposes for us. We read this in Romans, another famous text that says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And we know that in all things. All things. Hardship, difficulties in life are not evidence that somehow we've fallen out the system. Somehow we've fallen out of God's plan. It's just a tough part of the plan that he has for us. He loves us. He loves us more than we can imagine. And he's not going to let us down. He's still looking after us. In fact, God is so infinitely powerful and wise, he can even work through those who are directly opposing him to achieve what he desires. See, he's God. His will is greater than anyone else's. The cause of Paul being moved towards Rome was this plot to kill him. Now, following the collapse of the trial at the Sanhedrin, we're told here that more than 40 men conspired to kill Paul. Now, these guys were likely to have been zealots, the Jewish patriots who were furious at Paul, furious at what they saw as being his treachery against the Jewish people. And their plan that they came up with, it wasn't just them, it also involved the chief priests and the elders of the people in the Sanhedrin all being complicit. You've got all these sort of people coming together to orchestrate an assassination. That they would ask the Romans for Paul to be brought to the Sanhedrin for what would appear to be a very legitimate reason. They're trying to find out more. And while he's on his way from the barracks to the Sanhedrin through the windy streets, these zealots would be waiting. They would ambush the delegation and they would kill him. Now, when you actually start to think about their plan, it's a bit crazy. Because they were accusing Paul of violating the law when actually they were prepared to violate the law by lying in order to commit murder. Now there we have the 6th and the 9th commandments being broken, and the hypocrisy of it all seems to be totally lost in them. But they were resolute in doing this. Their dedication to this plot is seen in this radical oath that they took not to eat or drink until they had fulfilled their oath, fulfilled their plan. Their dedication is also seen in the fact that they must have factored in the consequences of all this. If they had ambushed Paul, inevitably, being surrounded by Roman soldiers, these soldiers would have been caught up. Some of these soldiers would have been wounded. Some of these soldiers would have been killed. And that would have brought in serious reprisals for the people of Jerusalem. Even innocent people who had nothing to do with it. They would suffer. So the people behind this plot would be causing harm on the people that they claimed to serve and defend against Paul for defaming them. Yet this was a risk they were willing to take because they were driven by this blind hatred of Paul and of the gospel. Yet despite their vehement organised hostility against Paul and their dedication to carrying it out, the assassination attempt failed because God had another plan. And they couldn't override God's plan. It tells us in Proverbs, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. I'm sure they would have been absolutely furious to know that their actions were actually the catalyst for which Paul was removed from Jerusalem to the protection of Caesarea. And from there, as we're going to see in later chapters, he went on to Rome. Their intentions were for evil. And God not only frustrated their plans, he actually worked through them to bring about his plan. Now, we see this elsewhere in the Bible. We see it in the Old Testament in the story of Joseph. We don't have time to go into it this morning, but we see God's wisdom and power even more prominently in what Christ did on the cross. I mean, earlier in Acts, we have Peter preaching that great sermon on the day of Pentecost. And one of the things that he said when he was convicting the people of their guilt, he said to them, "This man," talking about Jesus, "was handed over to you by God's set purpose and foreknowledge. And you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him." Now there again, even on the cross, we see people who were driven by hate to do that which was evil, but God working through their actions to do good. Now, of course, it didn't excuse their actions, and that's something that we need to just note and be careful. God isn't the author of sin. God does not approve sin. It's just that God brings good from it in spite of the evil intent of man. That's how wise he is. And this is for us something that we can take great confidence in, that not even the most vehement, wicked, organised hostility against the Lord's people can thwart God's plan for them. Not the most organised, vehement hostility against the church can stand. We might not always easily detect the good that God is doing, but we can be absolutely assured that he is doing it. His purposes might not be so clear to us, but his purposes for good are being fulfilled, and we've got to trust him in that. And what it means for us at a practical level and everyday level is, see if folks have it in for us at school, or see if folks have it in for us at work. It doesn't matter if we are the victim of some orchestrated campaign against us because of blind hatred of us because we love Christ. It doesn't matter. We just need to keep trusting in God and being faithful to him, assured that somehow or other, even in that horrible situation, things will work out for us. God will accomplish his purposes for good through it. And it doesn't matter as well how feeble we feel, how weak we might feel, how insignificant we feel, because as we see here, God can use the weakest and the lowliest of people in this world to accomplish his plans. As we see here, we've got Paul's nephew who heard about this plot from somewhere. Now, I don't know if you've all heard the saying, was it loose lips sink ships? You know, the old wartime saying. So maybe it was a couple of zealots with loose lips who were chatting in the street and were overheard by Paul's nephew. And maybe they spoke unguarded in front of him about this because they just presumed everyone hated Paul because he was a horrible traitor in their eyes, so everyone must hate him. And they didn't realise that this young man was actually Paul's nephew. We don't know how he heard about the plot, but he heard. And I think we can rule out this is simply a piece of good luck. This is the Lord's hand in this as well. Nothing happens by chance. I wish I'd written it down. There's a proverb, Proverb 16:33, that talks about the lot being cast into the lap, but the Lord determines the decision. I think it's Proverbs 16:33. You can look it up, but one of the things it states, nothing happens by chance. So Paul's nephew, he heard about this, he decided it wasn't right, he wanted to do what was good and what was noble, so he went to the barracks. He got to see Paul, he explained to Paul what was being planned against him. Paul, he spoke to the centurion, he got an audience with the commander, and the commander, he took the boy by the arm to hear what he had to say, which implies to us that this was a young boy. This wasn't a man. I know that the text says he was a young man. That implies he's an adolescent, he's a sort of teenager. And he was a teenager with a bit of courage, a bit of maturity as well to do what he did, because you just actually, again, try to imagine it. I mean, he would have felt pretty weak and feeble. You know, he's going up to the barracks, standing next to a burly Roman centurion with all the finery, getting taken through these pretty austere barracks, pretty intimidating barracks, to then speak to a commander. How intimidating the whole experience must have been for him. And obviously it was something the commander was aware of, because he showed a degree of gentleness to the boy. He took him by the arm. What's this you want to tell me? And you also think as well about how torn this boy must have been. Because he was hearing what people were saying about his uncle. He'd seen the strength of feeling that people had against his uncle. Perhaps even some of his own family members didn't like his uncle and what was going on. And so he'd be hearing what people were saying about Paul, and he's bound to have had a degree of split loyalties, to Paul, to his own people. What should he do? Yet he knew what was the right thing to do, and he did it. And because of his actions, of course, the plot was foiled. Paul's life was spared. His evangelistic work would continue in Rome. Many more, as a result, would hear the gospel. And yet, isn't it interesting here, we don't even know the name of this boy. His name's not recorded. He was Paul's nephew, but he appears to be someone who, in the eyes of this world, is relatively insignificant. He's weak, he's feeble, he's not even named. And yet, God used his positive actions to bring about his purposes. Now, that's got to give us all hope as well. As weak and feeble, as insignificant that we might tend to feel, even our most pathetic, bludged attempts to do what is good can be used by God to bring blessing and advance his kingdom. We actually read in 1 Corinthians, it tells us, God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God is in the habit of using nobodies to build his kingdom. He works through the weak and lowly. We also see here he works through the high and mighty, even unbelievers in high position to accomplish his plans, even though they don't know it. We see here also in the commander this being shown to be true. As soon as he heard about the plot, he took decisive action, and he charged the boy not to tell a soul, obviously probably to protect him to a degree, but also to make sure no one heard that he was going to take measures to prevent this. And what he did was he deployed a detachment of 470 troops. We're told there's 200 heavily armed soldiers, 70 cavalry, and 200 lightly armoured spearmen. And he also provided a horse for Paul. And that evening he sent them towards Caesarea. Halfway there, which a place called Antipatris, which I'm told is about 30 miles or so from Jerusalem, they stopped, and the foot soldiers, they were able to return home. The cavalry would press on towards Caesarea, because by then the threat of ambush was over. So Paul would arrive in Caesarea, where Governor Felix was, where the centre of Roman power in that region was, where Paul would be safe. Commander also wrote a letter to Felix to introduce Paul, to introduce the situation, the reasons for sending him. And again, just as a wee sort of going off tangent, we can only guess how Luke, the author of this book, actually got his hands on this letter, but somehow he did, and he recorded it. And it's interesting when we read it. We find out the commander is called Claudius Lysias, and we see that he's, I guess he's got the same fault as all of us. You know, he tries to portray himself in the best possible light. You know, he's the hero of his own story, if you like, because when you read it, it was him who rescued Paul when he found out that he was a Roman citizen. Well, that's a slight embellishment. You know, we know there was a wee bit more to it than that. He'd actually come close to making a career-defining mistake, you know, in having Paul flogged before he found out that Paul was a citizen. But still, what he records is fairly accurate. And it reveals to us as well just the difficulty that the Romans had trying to work out Judaism, trying to work out what was going on, trying to understand the passions of the Jewish people and the intricacies of the law. It states as well that Paul had done nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. It also states this plot to kill Paul and how he decided to send him there to be tried under Roman law, with the accusers in Jerusalem being told to go there to take up their case with him. Now, again, we see something of the wisdom of God here, as he uses the strong and the powerful as unwitting agents to do as he pleases. And again, we see that throughout the Bible. I mean, the classic Old Testament example of this is Cyrus, the Persian conqueror of Babylon. If you read Isaiah, we see that Isaiah prophesied Cyrus's rise to power and his role in delivering God's people from what was painful exile in Babylon. There's a couple of verses from chapter 44 and 45. It says of Cyrus, "He is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundations be laid." And then it goes on to say, "For the sake of Jacob my servant, of Israel my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honour, though you do not acknowledge me." Cyrus was not a good man. He didn't acknowledge God. In fact, he worshipped the Babylonian god of Marduk. And yet still the Lord used him to fulfill his plans and his purposes for his people. And the same is true today. And this is one of the reasons that, you know, we shouldn't despair. We shouldn't lose perspective about various people in power. Now, I'm not saying that people in power should not be accountable, far from it. In fact, we can take a measure of comfort in knowing that ultimately they're accountable to God. But we shouldn't despair. We shouldn't lose our heads, because ultimately it's God's will that will prevail through their actions. He's in control. It's really remarkable at the end of this passage. You've got Paul, who really is, he's a dead man walking. He's walking about. He's got a huge target on his head, a price on his head. That's at the start of the passage. And at the end, you've got this detachment of 470 soldiers making sure that he's safe, making sure that he's in Caesarea, and the fortress there safe, guarded by what were the best soldiers in the world at that time. Who says the Lord doesn't have a sense of humour? I think for us, the key thing to take from this is our God is no fool. He is infinitely wise, infinitely powerful, and in all things, and I underline, in all things, he is working out his plans and his purposes. Now, for us as individuals, we might not be going to Rome, but we can be assured he is taking us somewhere. He has a plan and a purpose for us. And when we get to glory, I don't think we're going to be given black leather gloves and a cigar. But, we are going to be able to say together, we love it when a plan comes together. Because ultimately, on that day, we'll finally see that truly our glorious God has done all things well. Let's pray.